There's a dangerous moment that happens every morning, a moment nobody talks about. It happens before the world even sees you, before the messages, before the fake smiles, before the noise. It's the first thought you allow into your mind after waking up. And most people lose the war right there. Not at noon. Not after failure. Not after heartbreak. Before 8 a.m. That's when anxiety enters. Comparison enters. Weakness enters. The memory of someone who ignored you enters. The fear of not being enough enters. And the terrifying part? Most people don't even realize they surrendered. They wake up and immediately hand their mind to the world, to notifications, to attention, to validation, to other people's moods. And then they wonder why they feel empty by the end of the day. Marcus Aurelius once wrote that the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. Look carefully at your life. What color has your mind become? Before we go deeper, subscribe to the channel, like the video, and stay until the end. Because the final lesson is the one most men avoid their entire lives. And once you see it, you will never wake up the same way again. The truth is, mornings reveal who you really are. Not your words, not your image, not your social media confidence. Your first thoughts expose the condition of your soul. A weak mind wakes up reacting. A disciplined mind wakes up deciding. That's the difference. Most people open their eyes and immediately search for emotional stimulation. They need noise because silence forces them to meet themselves, and many people are terrified of themselves, terrified of their own thoughts, their regrets, their loneliness, their lack of control. That's why they scroll. Not because they're entertained, because they're escaping. But the Stoics understood something modern people forgot. If you cannot sit alone with your own mind in the morning, your mind owns you, and ownership is dangerous. Because once the world controls your emotional state before breakfast, your entire day becomes a reaction instead of a creation. You become emotionally available to chaos. One rude message ruins your mood. One rejection destroys your confidence. One memory weakens your discipline. That is not strength. That is dependency. Marcus Aurelius would wake before sunrise, not because he loved suffering, but because he understood human nature. He understood that comfort weakens awareness, and awareness is everything, because the real battle is not against people. It's against the version of yourself that keeps negotiating with weakness. The version that says, 5 more minutes. I'll start tomorrow. Maybe I'm not enough. Maybe they were right about me. That voice has destroyed more lives than failure ever did. And the worst part? It sounds like you. That's why mornings matter, because before the world speaks to you, you speak to yourself, and most people are being mentally poisoned by their own internal dialogue. Pay attention to how people wake up. Some immediately search for attention. Some search for distraction. Some search for a person who no longer loves them. Some search for proof that they matter, but a Stoic searches for control. Because external validation is one of the most addictive drugs on earth. The moment your peace depends on another human being, you become emotionally fragile, and fragile people are easily manipulated. That's why silence is power. A man who can wake up alone, without needing immediate validation from the world, becomes psychologically dangerous, because now he cannot be controlled through attention. He no longer chases, he observes, and people feel that energy immediately. There's something unsettling about someone who remains calm while everyone else is emotionally starving. You've seen it before. The quiet person in the room, the one who doesn't overshare, the one who doesn't panic when ignored, the one who doesn't beg to be understood. That kind of silence carries weight, because emotional control is rare, especially today. Modern life profits from your lack of control. They want your attention fragmented, your emotions unstable, your mind overstimulated. A calm mind cannot be manipulated easily. That's why disciplined mornings feel almost rebellious now. When you wake up and choose silence instead of stimulation, reflection instead of reaction, discipline instead of dopamine, You separate yourself from the majority immediately, and that separation changes your entire identity. Because confidence is not built through motivation, it's built through evidence. Evidence that you can control yourself. Every morning you resist emotional chaos. You teach your brain something powerful. I am not a slave to impulse. That changes a man. Slowly, quietly, permanently. But here's the painful truth nobody wants to hear. Many people don't actually want peace. They want distraction from themselves. Real peace requires confrontation. You must confront your addictions, your emotional dependency, your resentment, your insecurity, your need to be chosen. And that confrontation usually happens in silence, especially early in the morning. That's why lonely mornings feel heavy for some people, because there are no crowds to hide inside, no conversations to escape into, no temporary pleasure to numb the emptiness, just you and the truth you keep avoiding. Marcus Aurelius believed that suffering often comes not from events, but from the stories we attach to them. Read that again carefully. A rejection becomes, I'm not worthy. Silence becomes, they don't care about me. Failure becomes, my life is over. But reality is usually much simpler than the emotional drama created by the mind, and mornings expose that drama clearly. Because before the distractions begin, you can finally hear your own thinking. That's why mentally strong people protect their mornings aggressively. Not because it's trendy, because they understand psychological warfare. The world enters through attention first. If your attention is weak, your emotions become vulnerable. And once emotions become vulnerable, discipline disappears. You stop training, stop creating, stop improving, stop respecting yourself. Everything collapses slowly from the inside. That's why Stoicism is not about becoming emotionless. It's about refusing to let emotions become your master. There's a difference. A Stoic still feels pain, still feels heartbreak, still feels rejection. But they do not worship those emotions. Modern people worship emotions constantly. If I feel insecure, it must be true. If I feel anxious, something must be wrong. If I feel lonely, I must be unlovable. No. Feelings are temporary weather, not permanent identity, and the strongest people understand this before 8 a.m. While others wake up consumed by emotional storms, they sit quietly and remember who they are. That's mental armor, not pretending to be tough, not acting cold, not hiding pain. True mental armor is remaining centered while chaos tries to enter your mind. And chaos always tries to enter early, especially through memory. Isn't it strange how the mind loves revisiting old wounds in the morning? The betrayal, the message left unanswered, the person who changed, the moment you embarrassed yourself, the years you lost. Morning thoughts can become emotional ambushes, and if you aren't careful, you spend the entire day fighting ghosts. Marcus Aurelius warned himself constantly about this. He reminded himself that the mind becomes shaped by repeated thoughts, meaning every morning you rehearse suffering. You strengthen suffering. Every morning you rehearse weakness. You strengthen weakness. This is why your routine matters more than motivation ever will. Motivation disappears when emotions change, but rituals survive emotion. A disciplined morning routine tells your mind, we move regardless of mood. That is power, especially in a generation addicted to emotional comfort. Look around. People quit relationships because of temporary feelings, quit goals because of temporary doubt, quit themselves because of temporary pain. Everything is temporary now, except consequences. And eventually, lack of discipline creates a silent self-hatred most people never admit. Because deep down, everyone respects self-control. Even people who mock discipline secretly admire it. Why? Because discipline signals self-respect. When someone wakes early, controls their mind, protects their peace, and remains emotionally composed, It sends a message without words. My mind belongs to me. That energy changes how people treat you. People sense emotional desperation immediately. They sense insecurity immediately. They sense approval-seeking behavior immediately. And sadly, the world often punishes desperation. That's why detachment becomes attractive. Not fake coldness. Not pretending not to care. Real detachment. The ability to remain grounded whether people stay or leave. That kind of emotional independence is rare, and rare things carry value. But detachment is painful at first, because it forces you to stop chasing people who were never chasing you. It forces you to stop begging for understanding from people committed to misunderstanding you. It forces you to stop abandoning yourself just to avoid loneliness. And loneliness is where most people break. Not because solitude is inherently painful, but because silence removes distraction. Suddenly you hear every insecurity clearly, and many people spend their entire lives trying to outrun that voice. But the Stoics did the opposite. They sat with it, questioned it, observed it, mastered it. That's the difference between avoiding darkness and understanding it. A man who understands his darkness becomes harder to destroy, because now he's aware of his emotional triggers, his weaknesses, his cravings, his ego. Awareness creates control, and control creates freedom. Not freedom to do whatever you want. Freedom from becoming emotionally controlled by everything around you. Imagine waking up and not needing someone's message to feel valuable. Imagine not being emotionally destroyed by rejection. Imagine being able to sit alone in silence without panic. Most people never experience that kind of peace, because they spend their lives trying to be chosen, instead of choosing themselves. That's the hard truth. The world taught people to seek attention before identity, validation before self-respect, love before inner stability. And then they wonder why relationships feel empty. You cannot build healthy love on emotional dependency. Dependency creates fear. Fear creates control. Control destroys connection. That's why emotionally disciplined people often appear calmer in relationships. They appreciate people deeply, without emotionally collapsing when things change. Because they already built a relationship with themselves first. And that relationship is built every morning, before 8 a.m. Not through perfection, through awareness. Awareness of thoughts, awareness of impulses, awareness of emotional patterns. The Stoics knew something modern psychology keeps rediscovering. Your mind becomes what you repeatedly allow. So if every morning begins with fear, comparison, resentment, desperation, eventually those emotions become your personality. But if mornings begin with stillness, discipline, reflection, and self-respect, your entire life slowly changes shape. Quietly. That's the beautiful part. Real transformation is rarely dramatic. It happens silently. One controlled morning at a time. One resisted impulse at a time. One moment of emotional restraint at a time. Until one day, the same things that once shattered you no longer move you. And that's when you realize something profound. Strength is not loud. Weakness usually is. People constantly announcing their importance, their emotions, their victories. Their relationships are often trying to convince themselves, but calm people rarely need to perform, because inner stability removes the need for constant external proof. Marcus Aurelius understood this deeply. He ruled an empire, yet constantly reminded himself not to become emotionally ruled by praise, fear, pleasure, or ego. Imagine that level of awareness. Most people cannot even control their mood before breakfast, and that's why only a small percentage truly separate themselves mentally, not because they're superhuman, because they guard their minds carefully, especially in the morning, especially before the world enters. So tomorrow morning, before you touch your phone, before you check who remembered you, before you search for validation, sit in silence for a moment and ask yourself one uncomfortable question. Who controls my mind before 8 a.m.? Because the answer to that question is shaping your entire life, more than talent, more than intelligence, more than luck. Your thoughts become your identity. Your identity becomes your behavior becomes your destiny, and destiny is built quietly, in the early hours, when nobody is watching. With that said, thanks for watching, and until next time.